My name is Merrill Jubro, CEO of Mark Research and the chair-elect of the MS Marketing Research Program at Michigan State. I'm really excited and delighted to be part of Spartan Insights. Spartan Insights is a series of podcasts that I'll be hosting and interviewing one of the 350 alumni from the Michigan State Market Research Program and 50 board members. Today's guest on Spartan Insights is Brenner, the Senior Director, Advertising, Social, and Retail Effectiveness Research from Microsoft. Bernard, thanks so much for being a guest on Spartan Insights.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, Bernard, let's start with this. Just start a little bit about your current responsibilities at Microsoft.
Sure. As technology often does, my responsibilities have actually changed from what the intro was. And my responsibilities now are looking over product marketing research and customer insight for two core businesses and one core discipline area. So the two core businesses that I look after are what we call modern work. At Microsoft, modern work essentially means that that suite of programs that everybody spends a lot of time in, which is Office 365, which is your PowerPoint, your Excel, Word, so on and so forth. You also have Teams. So I look after Teams, which is a communication and collaboration platform, which has been greatly influenced by the happenings of the last few months. And then the second book of work I look after is security, compliance, and identity. And security, compliance, and identity are kind of those things that Microsoft creates just to ensure that both the end user as well as the corporation and sort of all the points and nodes in between kind of have a very secure workspace and a very secure line to get things done. So it protects you from things like malware and phishing. It ensures that you are tunneled in and people can't spy on the work that you're doing. It ensures that the devices that you're accessing the corporate network from, corporate network can identify as devices that you are utilizing and that are not, devices that are imposter devices or people trying to break into the network. So it's kind of like what I call the less sexy part of the portfolio, but just the foundation that creates innovation and trust that really helps drive computing for corporations, small businesses, and end users alike. And then the discipline area I run is what we call our social intelligence practice. This one's pretty exciting in that we go into the terabytes of social data, organic raw social data, and we ask business questions and we write queries to try to answer those business questions. It's kind of a cool and innovative practice because it doesn't have survey bias. It doesn't have questionnaire bias. It has bias in audience, but sometimes that's really cool and really fun to look at. It's relatively fast and cheap to do. So we're really excited about developing this practice. We've been doing it for the last few years and hone the discipline every month. So that's one that we're continuing to work on to sort of complement and act as a substitute for primary research.
That's great. With the pandemic, I want to follow up on one of the things you said. I think it's kind of interesting. With the pandemic, obviously, it's taken some businesses and kind of really help them springboard to the next level. And really, from a revenue standpoint, I would say has added to the company. Is that the case with Teams? Obviously, the communication device, everybody needs to communicate a little bit different than they did maybe perhaps 5 months ago. Am I safe to say that's a positive for Microsoft?
Yeah, it's positive for Microsoft. It's positive for a number of other companies as well, right? Including the program we're talking on right now, which is Zoom. It's very positive for Zoom. Yep. It's been positive for Slack. It's been positive for Google Meet. It's positive for Teams as well. It's a shared experience that all, what we kind of refer to ourselves as information workers. It's a shared experience we all had. Some point during the month of March or early April, people's lives changed, virtually overnight. One day they're at the office and working the way that they had always worked, and then the next day they were at home, and they were at home for a long duration of time. These collaboration and communication programs, all of them were absolutely necessary and critical to make connections, to get work done, to see family, to try to have some sort of social well-being outside of who's sort of in your immediate family and your immediate pod to a degree. So all of these services, I hate to say benefited from COVID because it's hard to say anything benefits from COVID, but they were instrumental in helping people maintain communication and maintain connection.
That's great. So let's talk about COVID a little bit. I'm sure life has changed a little. I know it's changed dramatically for me, how I approach my day, the time I start. Some of the things I concentrate have just dramatically changed. I assume the same is with you. Can you talk a little bit about some of those changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So many things have impacted. I would say I've gone through different stages, and there's been literature written about this from McKinsey and I think BCG, and kind of how people and how companies go through the stages of adapting to COVID. I will be honest, right? Like in the very first part of COVID, we thought we were going to be home for 2 to 3 weeks, and I was like, yippee! I don't have a commute. I can I can wear shorts to the office, right? Like I can just sort of like kick back and relax and do my thing. And I would say that feeling lasted for a couple days. And then I started to really miss some of my colleagues, right? Like I sit in an office next to 4 people that I thoroughly enjoy. We're always pranking each other and laughing and doing the things that make work enjoyable. I always say if you're not laughing at work, you're not doing it correctly. So I started to miss those. I started to also figure out, like, it's really hard to turn off, right? When your house is your house and your office, you always feel like you are working in some way, shape, or form. I've always found it, kind of hard to turn off. That was a couple things in the first few weeks as well. And then when the kids were sent home from school, balancing the trying to get work done and trying to, ensure they were getting some sort of education, that became really tough as well. But then things kind of started to normalize, right? And you started to get into a rhythm. For me, like, that rhythm was spending some time with the family between 8 and 9 a.m., working pretty hard between 9 and 12. I would then take some time off around noon to exercise for an hour or so, and then I would be back on around 1:30, and I would go, pretty much hard until 4 or 5, take a few hours off, spend with the family, and then kind of clean up email later that night. And that sort of became my rhythm. And as my rhythm, started to permeate through the household and others' rhythms, specifically the kids, their rhythms did as well. I'll say another thing that impacted me was I actually stopped working on the weekends. When I was in the office, I generally would catch up on email on Saturday morning, and I would, kind of prepare for my week on Sunday. That seems to have stopped. And it seems to have stopped because I do most of that stuff on Friday afternoon, because for the most part, there's not many meetings. So those are some of the changes. I'd say another change, which continues to drive through, and Microsoft is no different than any other company, is because you don't have an opportunity for informal touch points or checkpoints. Your calendar tends to be more full. It's more full with shorter duration meetings.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you're online quite a bit.
It's interesting. I echo a lot of the things that you say. I used to start work at 6:15. Now I start at 5 a.m. And because of that, I tend to be on a lot of calls and I pace. So I used to do about, 19,500 steps in a day. And now I do about 24,000. I've actually lost 15 pounds during COVID. So that's, I guess, one little positive for me. But there's been a lot of change. But, since we're doing the podcast really for the students at the MSMR program, change isn't great for everybody, right? I mean, Bernard, if you think about it, some people are resistant to change. There's a lot of people resistant to change. It wasn't like we saw this coming, right? Whether good or bad, we may have a new president down the road. We can prepare for that change, even if once it's announced, we have a few months to prepare, right? This change happened, like you said, overnight. Any advice to people who are a little bit resistant to change that might be coming into the workforce in the next, 6 months or a year?
Yeah, I think everybody's first reaction to change, has some degree of anxiety, right? Has some degree of a feeling that doesn't necessarily feel good, and a lot of people will try to push that away. I think it's healthy to recognize it, and it's healthy to understand that the immediate changes that happen to people, they're hard and they're hard to fathom. I would say one of the things that has helped me get through it, and I talked about the first 3 weeks, and then I acclimated, rather quickly after that, is something that Microsoft itself teaches quite a bit, specifically under our new CEO Satya, which is adopting a growth mindset. instead of going, well, I really, like I was talking about my 4 colleagues that I just love to laugh and giggle with and prank with at work. So instead of dwelling on the inability to see them, what can I learn from where I am today? And then how can I use that learning to figure out how to prank them online, right? How to interact with them in a different way. And you can apply that across team meetings and getting projects done and presentations and that sort of thing, right? So it's that kind of adopting it and using it as a growth opportunity. And again, I'm really big on laughter, right? So I was on a call about a month and a half ago with a relatively senior level person at Microsoft. And during the call, which was a video call, my son walks in the room and he gives me a hug like he does generally anytime I'm on the phone or on a video call. And then he walks out of the room and everybody paused for a moment and somebody in the background said, "Was that your son who is about 8 years old?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Was he in his underwear?" I'm like, "Yep, he was in his underwear." Like, that's just what he does. He just walks around and kind of bombs my video calls. There would have been a time years ago I would have been mortified by that. Now it's just like, hey, roll with it. It is what it is. So I think that's one of the fun ways to adopt a change.
That is great. So we're going to switch gears for a little bit. You've been a hiring manager for a lot of years. I mean, you've hired probably a lot of researchers in your career, I would imagine, at a number of different companies. Can you talk a little bit about some of the changes that you look for today versus maybe 10 years ago when you hired a researcher, with the soft skills, the hard skills, things that you really look for that are probably a little bit different?
Yeah, I would say what I would think of and what you would think of as sort of classic market researchers, right? People who were well-versed in primary quantitative methods, people who are well-versed in good, solid qualitative methods. That was sort of the rhyme and rhythm that I hired for, because I was about, ensuring that we were getting the work done. I would say about 10 years ago or so, I started to flip that a little bit. And I started to hire people who were significantly more focused on business problems, able to connect a research issue with a business strategy, able to pull in different kinds of data to answer the business question, right? So there was a time in my career, and I think in everybody's career, if somebody was stating a business objective or a research objective to you, you were automatically designing a questionnaire in your head. Now what I'm looking for are people who, instead of designing a question in their head, are also thinking, I can get that information from social. I can get that information from a telemetry data feed. I can get that from some sort of modeling that we're doing, right? Or I can get that information from syndicated. To start to think about more holistically where information comes from, so we can answer questions with a bit more diversity and just simply faster. Specifically working in the tech field, if you're not fast to get to a answer, if you're not comfortable providing an answer that is 80 to 90% to the pin as opposed to in the hole, then you're going to miss the opportunity to influence. So I would say that's one thing that I've looked for. And with that is, a mindset of agility, a mindset of experimentation, a mindset of resilience. Those things are critically important to a long research career in technology.
That's great. No, there's some really good takeaways for the students here, Bernard. I really appreciate you expanding on that. In terms of your career, when you look at it, you've had a few jobs on the client side, you've had a few jobs on the supplier side. How about some takeaways and some benefits from each?
Yeah, I think when you are on the supplier side, what I have found is you're learning to do research, right? You have a wide diversity of companies and business issues that you can work on. And each one of those is going to provide you a unique opportunity to kind of learn the discipline of research. Everything from design to, that thing in the middle where you kind of invest a lot early in your career, but maybe not so much later in your career, which is, the fielding and the field management and ensuring you're getting the right people into the survey. You learn a lot about analytics and analysis. You learn about different styles of reporting. And because of the diversity of clientele that you have, right, you're learning many different audiences. So when you're on the supplier side, it's just the sort of learning and giving back to the discipline. On the client side, one of the things I think is critically important is all those things that I said, you hire companies that are experts in those things. And now you focus on the client side on kind of the ends of the research process. So the business problem identification. I would say 9 out of 10 times when I'm talking to a marketer, to an engineer, to a stakeholder internally, the question that they're asking for is not the question they need solved. So really, during that conversation, thoroughly flushing out what is the problem that they're looking for, and then partnering with an expert supplier, expert partner to help provide an answer to that. And then again, in the client side, it's like focusing on the end to ensure that you are delivering answers to the question they have, and then being part of that strategy and that strategy implementation, right? And helping to drive the product and marketing strategies forward with a true voice of the customer or voice of the audience that you're looking at. So it's sort of like the supplier side is really about learning and honing and perfecting your discipline. And the client side is, what I found significantly more about diagnosing and impacting business strategy.
That's really well said. I must admit that a lot of people aren't as eloquent as you describing both of those roles and benefits. Really, I think the students are going to have a lot of information to jot down, and it wouldn't surprise me, Bernard, if they replay it a few times to get it all. So let's end with this question, which is, what advice do you give to the current students of the MSMR program at Michigan State? Just best practices, things that you've learned in your career. This is a crazy world that they're going to enter into the business world in the next year or so. What's the advice that you have for them?
It's a great question. I think there's 3 things that are kind of floating in my head. First one is they are learning how to be really good primary researchers. And those skills are super important. But one of the things that they don't realize they're learning how to listen to problems, design solutions, and provide thoughtful feedback on how to move forward with solutions to those problems via data. So there's that analytical component that they are learning now and they will learn on the job that can be applied to so many different disciplines. Like, it doesn't need to just sit in market research. You can take those learnings and apply them to a product marketing role. You can take those learnings and apply them to a finance role, right? Like a supply chain role. There's many different places that you can utilize what you're learning within market research and applying to different disciplines, right? So it's that. I think that's one thing that's one of those things. If had I know then what I know now, I would say. The second thing I would say is, if you want a long career in research, if you want to end up to be a senior leader in research at a client-side company or a supplier-side company, somewhere during the middle of your career, learn something else about marketing or learn something else about product management. One of the biggest regrets I have was sometime in the middle of my career at Nokia, I was offered a product marketing role, lead product marketing role for one of the up and coming units at Nokia a long time ago. And I regret not taking that, because I think if I would have spent 2 or 3 years in a product marketing role, I would have been such a stronger researcher, because I would have been able to relate to the business strategies. So I regret doing that. Anybody who asks for career advice, I always tell them, if you have an opportunity to spend some time in a different discipline and you want a long career in research, please do so, because it's just going to make you such a stronger, more well-rounded researcher. So I think that's the second piece of advice. The third piece of advice is one that some people want to hear and others don't, which is put in the time and do the work. Get in there, volunteer for projects that are stretch projects, volunteer for clients that are tough clients, volunteer to work with stakeholders that, are kind of known to be brilliant but hard, and just weather through that. And you will learn so much from those experiences, not just the knowledge that's passed through, but you'll learn, some of the things I spoke about earlier, which is agility, experimentation, grit, resilience. Those things are really important to, have a good, long, persistent career.
Wow, amazing. It really is. Bernard, I really appreciate your time today on Spartan Insights. My name is Merrill Dubrow. Thanks for listening.